Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. If you love reading, today you are in the right place because we will be discussing this book, A Love Song for Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams. And I'm very excited to talk about this today because I recently finished this. This is my most recent read and I really enjoyed it. And I just want to talk about in depth my thoughts about the characters, the plot, everything about the book. If you are unfamiliar with this story or Tia Williams, she writes romance books, and I really loved her other one, which is 7 Days in June. I feel like that one was really popular a few years ago. I know I read it a few years ago, close to when it came out, and I knew she was writing this one, and I actually bought this earlier this year in like March, and I've just been kind of holding on to it because I really wasn't in the mood to read this type of romance in the year that it was, or that I was having. And so I finally got around to reading it. I'm really glad I read it in October, and I'll talk a little bit about why later on. But if you don't know this story, it's a romance. It's about a young woman named Ricki Wilde who is kind of the black sheep of her family. She doesn't necessarily fit in with their view of how she should be living her life. Her family has a dynasty in Atlanta and a huge business, and she doesn't want to follow that. So she eventually moves up to New York in Harlem and pursues her own dreams there. And then of course we have a budding romance. She meets other people and she starts building her life there. But that is essentially the premise of the story. I would go into this if you're looking for something that's very whimsical, very magical, and something that really is an in-depth romance. And that's what I love about Tia Williams' books, is because her books are really they just have a lot of substance to them. I know sometimes I read some romances and they're just very surface level, or it's just a little shallow for me. And I really like Tia Williams' books because they are really in depth. There are a lot of the characters are really, thought out, and I really like that about them. So if that's what you're looking for in a book, I would definitely recommend this one. There are some magical elements to it, and some mystery elements. So if you are interested in that type of romance as well, this would be a great pick for you. But for now, I want to jump into talking about the book. There will be spoilers. I will be talking about, specific things that happen, and everything that I liked about it, and just my thoughts on everything. So first thing is, I really liked this book. I gave it a 4.5 stars. There were a few things that I wasn't vibing with in the book, and really it was kind of more about the pacing, not necessarily the book itself or the plot or the characters or anything. But I would say on the front end, the pacing was a little scattered to me. The beginning felt a little slow, but I understood why we were setting it up that way. Ricki, from her point of view, we had to know her family dynamic, her reasoning for wanting to go up to New York, and all of that stuff. So the beginning felt a little slow to me, but once it picked up, and once her and Ezra had that moment of them first seeing each other in the garden, and then I was like, okay, what's going on? I had no idea there was going to be a magical element to this, and that Ezra was a perennial, which I'd actually never heard of that. And so I was really interested in understanding what that was, and all of that stuff. So I thought that was really cool, and I was not expecting that at all in this book. I thought it was a realistic romance, and so I loved the little magical aspect of it. So from that point where her and Ezra meet, and she's trying to figure out who he is, for one, why does she feel the way she does, she feels so drawn to him. From that point, I was really hooked and invested because the mystery aspect was also getting me. I think I like this more because of that rather than the actual romance. I felt like the book was more about figuring out who the guy was, and then figuring out what is his connection to Ricki, and why is this thing going on. And of course we found out in the book, and I guess the twist in the book is that he's a perennial, and his lover from the 1920s was practiced voodoo, and she cursed him, and all this stuff, which I thought was so cool. I loved the flashbacks that we got, because when you write a book about Harlem, especially during the Harlem Renaissance, of course you are wanting to have clips from that or moments from that in the book. And so I thought it was really cool how she wove in Ezra's story from his beginning and how he ended up there, and tied it to Ricki's story, how they ended up where they ended up, them falling in love and all of that stuff. I really felt the world building was phenomenal. I really felt immersed in the story, and especially with the flashbacks, like I majored in history in undergrad, so I like history. And so I personally really enjoyed that part of it because that's something that interests me. But I just thought she did a really good job of like building that world of how it was in the 20s and what it was like for Ezra to come from the South. I'm also from the South, and so of course our experiences won't be the same, but it was cool to see how his story progressed throughout, you know, the 100 years that he was alive or so, and him having to move from the South, his journey from that. And I just thought it was really rich in the history, and then her depiction of Harlem in the 20s was really awesome. And I thought that was cool of like how it was from Ezra's perspective, and if he's like a jazz musician, so he was in like all the speakeasies, and it was during the era of Prohibition, and people were just, you know, partying and performing, and it was a really cool thing to see in the book. And outside of the flashbacks, I also didn't necessarily like the other point of views because they weren't consistent. So I did like Della's point of view. She was one of my favorite characters, the older woman who got Ricki to come to New York, and then she turned out to be Adelaide's daughter, the woman who cursed Ezra in the beginning of the whole story. That was her daughter. And so I thought it was cool, that connection, and I liked seeing her point of view. But we did get a random chapter from Tuesday, who was the friend, and the only time we really got to see her perspective was whenever she was breaking into Ezra's home. And so I just thought that kind of took me out of the story just a little bit because it was from a different point of view, and I wasn't used to that. And then it never really went back to that. And Tuesday kind of, she was a fully fledged character, but I think towards the end, you know, her perspective wasn't revisited, and I would have at least maybe liked to see one more chapter or one more moment from her perspective and how her story ended, because it did tell us, but like seeing it from her point of view would have been nice. And then of course I liked Miss Della. She was a really funny character, and I liked how she of course was at the end of her life, but she had all of these things that she wanted to do and wanted to accomplish before she died, and she was struggling with, I think she had cancer, lung cancer, or some sort of illness that was she had terminal diagnosis on. And so I really like to see that, because it's really just a reminder of like, life is short, you know, do what you want to do in these moments, because you only get one life. And if you have these things that you want to do, like chase after those dreams. And that's what I really liked about this book, is because there was so much more than just the romance. It was about chasing your dreams, having the romance, building that life that you want to live and that you want to experience. And I just really enjoyed that, because as someone in their mid-20s, you're kind of just like in that phase of, you know, where am I going with this? What am I doing? And you're in that quarter life crisis. And so I thought this was a fun story to read, because it all worked out for everyone in the end. Ricki and Ezra have their romance, and Ricki's story, you know, took off. And I just really liked to see that. I thought it was a good ending. And towards the end, I knew Della was going to be like this sacrifice, because who else would it be? I'm like, of course they have to get to the end. Like, they're both going to survive. And so I knew something like that was going to happen, and I was like, okay, Miss Della's the only one that would do it, and she sacrificed herself. So I thought that was really a nice sentiment as well, and she wanted to have it in her own, you know, terms, how it ended. So I liked that. So in terms of characters, I thought Ricki was a really relatable main character, and someone who I saw myself in, and I think a lot of people could relate to her. Like, even if you're not the outcast of your family, or you don't come from like this dynasty, a lot of people can relate to having these expectations that they feel like they have to live up to, either from their family or their friends, or maybe just societal pressures that they feel on them. And so I thought Ricki was really relatable, and I liked how she was a little bit awkward, because who isn't awkward? You know, a lot of people experience that or have social anxiety and things like that. And so I just thought she was relatable, and she was easy to like, and you wanted to root for her in the story. And then also Ezra had a really hard upbringing. His family was killed by the KKK while he was a sharecropper in the South. And that's something that most people cannot even imagine, like how that would feel, losing your family that way. And so I thought his character was really fleshed out as well. And again, someone can relate to having that type of struggle or coming from a background where you didn't grow up with a lot of money and you had to fight for your survival, fight for your success that you have now. So I just thought they both were like characters that were relatable in some way. Like you can relate your story or your situation to them in some way, even if it's not the exact same. And I loved them together. I thought they're really cute. And one other thing that I would have liked to see a little bit more of was the romance in the story. I felt like a lot of it was really of like the buildup of who is Ezra, how did he get there? We knew something was off about him, but like we didn't know exactly what. And then once you figured that out, then you realize, okay, well, there's this curse that's supposed to end on February 29th because of the leap year, and Ricky's gonna die on that day if they don't figure something out. So it was more about the mystery and the character aspect of it rather than the romance. So I went into it thinking it was a romance, but I feel like it's more of like literary fiction romance type of book. There's a lot going on in it, and it's really a book that I really enjoyed. And of course there's still romantic elements in it and I liked the couple together, but to me it was more about, you know, as I mentioned earlier, just living your life to the fullest and never taking a day for granted and taking those opportunities, chasing your dreams, that type of thing. And that's what I really liked about it. And so if Tia writes another book, I'm sure she will. I'll continue to read it. 7 Days in June was one of my favorite romances of all time. I have a separate bookshelf with all of my favorite books, and that's on there. And so, of course, I was going to pick this one up. And when I saw it was finally in paperback earlier this year, I was like, okay, finally, I can grab it, because I don't necessarily like reading hardback that much. And so the next book she writes, whatever it's about, I will be picking it up. And I'll be reading it. So I definitely recommend this book. Like I said, if you're looking for, if you've stayed for whatever reason, you have a lot of spoilers, but if you're looking for a romance mixed with a like coming of age, figuring out the world, mystery type of book, this is it. And I thought she did a wonderful job of just bringing all of that together and creating a beautiful story. So those are my thoughts on A Love Song for Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. If you've read this book, if you've read any of other books by Tia Williams, if you've read 7 Days in June, let me know. And just again, let me know what you think about it. Love to hear anyone's thoughts and how they felt about the book. And again, thank you all for watching. I will see you all in the next one.